Hi everybody. Hi everybody. Say hi everybody. I am at Stupid Cupid and we have good Wi-Fi at the hotel. Amazing. And so I thought I'd do the 10 years of etiquette and espionage talk live for all you all. It's just going to be a Q&A for the people who are here in the room, but it's going to be broadcast for all of you. There are no eyeballs watching, so I have no idea, but here we go. It's flipped already.
Oh, it's flipped. Okay.
It is. Okay, so I have my tea. Ted's gonna figure that out. I'm not gonna be in one place, so hi, goodbye. For those of you who missed any of my earlier talks, I used to teach, and the only way I knew my students were awake is if I paced. So I paced and I talk, especially if it's just me. If it's on a panel, I can sit still.
Nobody's touched the table.
Right, so we're at Stupid Cupid, and this panel is titled 10 Years of Etiquette and Espionage, because tomorrow is Etiquette and Espionage's official 10th birthday. And I think we only like 10 years, it doesn't feel like 10 years to me.
Is there cake?
Is there cake? There should be cake. There should always be cake, especially according to my Swedish publisher. So, here's the thing that I do when I am in person or even live. Because I will probably delete this immediately, is that you can ask me any question you like at all about anything, business related, steampunk related, book related, character related. If it is a major spoiler, I will say just come find me later and I'll tell you in secret. But otherwise, like, you guys made the effort to come see me here in person, so I'm going to reward you with as much honesty as I can dish out. So yeah, that's how I'm gonna do this thing. I will first start, because ostensibly this is Etiquette and Espionage, by telling you how that book came to be. And essentially it's as follows. So Soulless got published, which was a surprise to everybody involved, including the publisher, I think. The fact that it was then popular was an even bigger surprise. Nobody knew what steampunk really was. And it wasn't particularly popular at the time when that book got picked up, and otherwise that book looks terrible if you're a marketing department. Just terrible, because it is too many genres. So they don't know where to shelve it, which ended up working in my favor. Because nobody knew where to shelve it, so they just shelved it everywhere. So I got fans from all over the place. During the course of this, I had a blog, back in the days when you had blogs. My blog was on LiveJournal, which should tell you how old I am. But then my blog was on Tumblr. And
you're still on.
And I'm still on Tumblr. Shh, tell nobody. Tumblr is where I play. Anyway, so actually it was this series that got me onto Tumblr, because apparently that's where the young people were at the time. So they were like, you have to go onto Tumblr, Gail. It's like, fine. So anyway, that blog talked about, in that blog I talked about my love of young adult literature and how I had a real passion for it. It's something I still love. I think YA authors are some of the fastest paced, snappiest writers we have out there. You cannot afford to lose someone's attention. Well, unless you're like the 8th book in a series. Cough, cough. So I really admire YA authors and I really like it. And I actually use a lot of YA author tricks in my adult stuff to keep the pacing going. So, and I was very open about this in said blog. And my editor, the person who would become my editor at the time, reached out to my agent and basically was like, I understand Gail really likes YA. Would Gail consider writing YA? And my agent came waltzing over to me and was like, would Gail consider writing YA? And Gail was like, Gail would absolutely love to write YA. Let's do this thing. So this series, unlike the first series, I pitched as a full series. So when Little Brown, my publisher, bought the Finishing School series, they bought all 4 books, knowing that I would be then writing them pretty much back to back for them. So I could pitch them on a complete arc for these books. So unlike everything else I've written until the new series that's about to come out this year, I actually got to plan this one out, all 4 books. So to me, it feels some of the cleanest and tightest storytelling that I've ever done, because you go pretty seamlessly from one book to the next. And that was also how I wrote them. So yeah, I did not do that with any of my other series. So that is how the Finishing School series came to be. And then, of course, I got orphaned, which is what authors call it when your editor leaves you for a different house. To be fair, they leave everybody when they leave you for a different house. And then I got passed along to a new, younger editor named Deirdre, who's still at that publishing house, who I also really, really love. So I am very lucky in that I've had two fantastic editors with this particular series, both of whom I really love working with, and one of whom at least stayed in the industry. So that's the story of the Finishing School books, how they came to be. And now let us have open season on questions. You can ask me about those books, anything you want. I am ready. Have no fear. Yes, you were waiting.
So earlier you were talking about authors' messages. And I was curious as to what, it was a two-part question. One, did you have a message with this series? And how long, if not, did it take you to find what your message was and how to get it across? I
did. I would say that I have a message with all of my series, and it's kind of the same message, which is something that I personally deeply, deeply believe in, which is find your people. Like, find your family. Like, you might not be gifted with a good family to start with, so go find your people, find your family, find your friends. And that's one of the core tenets of the Finishing School books. And when I...
Okay. I'm noticing.
Oh, I see. Very good.
Oh, see that knocked over. No, for the people. No, they're crying. But hopefully some people will be sitting.
They'll wait. They're very patient.
Sorry, everybody. The phone's
I'm leaving your
You can leave me one chair, but don't. Yes.
You
This is the kind of readers I have. Helpful. So yeah, for example, when Hollywood was attempting to adapt something of mine, I've been through that option phase like 3 times at this juncture. They were gonna put a friend character, a female friend character into one of the books. I can't remember which one. That betrayed the main character, and that's exactly it. I was like, it doesn't read that way if you just read like Solus, or if you just read Etiquette and Espionage. But women don't betray women in my books, period. Like, I don't like that trope. I don't like the backstabby nature of it. I think it's really disingenuous to the brand. I almost never do betrayal. Now, older characters, especially spy characters, certainly may betray people, but that's because they have others that they're loyal to, and they're activating that instead. So yeah, that's one of the major tenets of the Finishing School series, is like, find your people, be loyal to those people, and and things will work out well if you have a good support network. And I think that jives with steampunk in particular, because steampunk, which was coming up right when I was writing all of these, also sort of find your people, find your crew, and the books have also done that for me, like this online tribe that people have found because of them, like the fact that I can always identify my signing line because people are chatting to each other in that signing line. I have a number of readers who have come to me to say, look, I found my partner because of your books. I found, my best friend because of your books. So I think the message of the book goes out. It is active, whether people really realize that that's what's happening. But it is a message that is in all of my books, is to answer your question. Now, there are other themes that are going on in the Finishing School books. The Finishing School books are coming of age, which is the Bildungsroman narrative, which most young adult is. And a coming-of-age narrative can generally be written one of 2 ways, either finding yourself or finding your place in society. Mine tend to be finding your place in society, and for me that means, again, finding your people. And so that's also endemic. I found my best friends and my people, the people who shared what I like to read, my geeky sci-fi people in high school during this YA time. They're still... I'm not going to tell you how old I am, still my best friends. And so that's one of the reasons I love YA and write my coming of ages as the, how do I find where I work in the world, as opposed to how do I find how to conquer the world on my own, which is a valid alternate coming of age narrative, but not the kind I write. So that messaging is also in there. Self-sufficiency, but because you find people who you can ask for help and lean on.
So, since you've wrapped series,
Yes, I end things. There are some people who like this about me and some people hate it about me, but I hate it when authors don't finish series, so that's why I finish them.
So, do you still hear those voices?
No, never. Not very, very, very rarely. I always say I feel like my characters are like, well, Gail's finally done messing about in our lives and we would like to go leave them. Like, thank you very much, stop it. I'm really open about the fact that I had a really hard time with Prudence, writing Prudence, the first, the Custard Protocol books, because I was actually under contract to write the first Prudence book in the middle of the finishing school book, and what I ended up writing was a real muddied version of Alexia's voice and Sophronia's voice. Prudence didn't have her own voice. And I basically had to go to my publisher and be like, yeah, I hate to do this to you, but I need either 2 years on my contract or I need to buy back my advance. And I was ready to buy back my advance because that's what it took for me to realize that I am one of those authors who has to stay in one character's head at a time. If I'm writing a series, I need to just focus on that. Yeah, because Prudence wasn't Prudence. She was this other mix. And then I had to, and that's, they let me take the 2-year hiatus. And then because they know I will write the book once I have my plate cleared, I can write the book for them. So they had faith in me, thank heavens. But yeah, then I finished the finishing school books very, very quickly. I was really quick handing those books in, much faster than my contract, because I knew I had to clear my palette and move on to a different character. And I knew I needed a little time to do that and get my head on for a different character. So yeah, they very rarely talk to me after I've decided I'm done with them. Occasionally, but really rarely. And you'll notice I'll swap often to a different POV. So if I want to include Alexia in another book, it's almost always going to be from Madame LeFou's point of view or one of the other characters' point of view. And that's also funner for me because then I get to tell a different character's perspective and often annoyance with a main character that you all probably loved, but which this other character sees completely differently because they're a different person. So that's how I revisit my favorite characters instead from other characters' perspectives. Yes?
A character who I loved even though my brain drops his name out.
Fair. I have a lot of characters.
Elderly, foppish gay vampire.
Lord Akaldama. Yes.
I noticed that he was in both series. So.
He's in all of them. Lord Akaldama will not shut up. So I think he's an active of my subconscious. So Lord Akaldama will sleep in. He'll sweep in, and he will drop what sounds at the time like incredibly superfluous information, but is usually my hind brain being like, you have to set this up for like 5 books in the future. But trust Lord Akaldama because he knows what's going on. Let him sweep in. So he has an appearance, I think, in almost everything Parasol verse I've written. Sideways or on purpose. He does, Sophronia or one of the spy characters in the background does. There's always going to be one of them mucking about in there. So yeah, you'll see him. And he didn't get his own book, but he's got his own offering recently. So
and he had a near-death scene.
Yes, he has had a near-death, and he's very dramatic. He has had lots of action, but he's not.
And boyfriends.
And yes, and gentleman callers. But he's not been a main character, and I doubt he ever will be. If he is, somebody gave me the idea to write a Lord Akaldama short story from Madame Pudgemuffin, the cat's perspective. That might happen, because that'd be a really fun character voice to climb inside. Okay.
So you touched on it a little bit earlier, but what has it been like? Like I just finished re-listening to Renaissance. So it's like, what has it been like? What was it like going back in and just kind of like tying up all the knots?
So much fun.
Yeah.
So much fun. So for those of you who are like relatively newer to my universe or whatever, there are 3 sort of core series. So there's the Parasol Protectorate series, which is the Soulless series. There's the Finishing School series, which is the Etiquette and Espionage series, and then there's the Custard Protocol series, which is Prudence, larking about. And you can read those first 2 in either order. Chronologically, you go Finishing School first, or in order written, you go the Soulless series first. I don't particularly care. There are people who have very strong feelings. You can argue with them on this subject. But essentially what I did is, all right. I wrote Solus. I thought Solus was the standalone prequel for the Custard Protocol book. So if you ask me how long I knew about Prudence and the Metanaturals, from the beginning is how long I knew about them. Some other characters less so, but Prudence was always kind of intended to be the main character. And then when I was in contract negotiations, everybody interested in that book was like, so the second book in the series. And I was like, oh, am I writing a series? Fine, publishing, you know better than me, surely. So then I wrote a second book in the series, and then I realized I couldn't quite tell everything I wanted. If you want me to write a series, I couldn't quite tell everything I wanted in 2 books. So Changeless has a cliffhanger, for which I apologize, but also I don't, because here's what happened. I was under a 2-book contract, and my editor finished that manuscript and then called me up on the phone and said, oh my God, what happens next? And I said, why are you calling me and not my agent? Because
I need a new
I need another contract, which got us the contract for Blameless. And then I jumped even more extra threads in Blameless. And then I was like, so 2 more books? And they were like, and then Changeless hit in the New York Times. And I'm like, yes, 2 more books. So that's how you have 5 books in the first series, was because I was being tricksy with Changeless. And then YA is a different animal, so they asked for 4 books altogether. I pitched 4 books because I'm a Tamara Pierce fan, and she always writes in quads. So I was like, I feel like YA is 4. I know that seems a little weird. Most people think of these things as 3s, but I was like, 4 is how I feel. I like the number 4 too. It's a very satisfying number. I know. I'm a weirdo. And then with the Custard Protocol series, it was back to my first publisher. My first publisher who normally does only 2-book contracts. So I had a 2-book contract for the first 2 in the spin-off series, the Prudence and Imprudence, which is why she's the main character for those 2. And you can actually read them as a duology. That's one little story arc for those 2. And that's because I knew I would be facing up to some epic contract negotiations at the end of that second book, and I did, and it was crazy, back-end business. My long-form editor had left that publishing house. She's the one who originally acquired Solus, and a very dear friend and still near and dear to my heart. And they did not know who to pass me off to at that juncture. And so I rolled through a bunch of different editors. And it's real hard, let me just say, to be writing the spin-off series of an existing series in which there are over 10 books already for an editor who is not familiar with your world or your series, right? Your editor needs to know what's going on with these characters, or they just hang you out dry. And that's, so at this juncture, thank heavens I had beta readers who would not let me make mistakes in my universe and stuff like that. So then I wrote the 3rd book in that series. And then I was also getting increasingly sort of disenchanted with traditional publishing and New York and the way the system works and how chaotic it was and how much lack of control I had, because I'm a bit of a control freak. And so I very much intentionally wrote Reticence, which is the last one, to tie up as many loose threads as possible. So I wanted you guys to get visits from all of your favorite characters. I wanted you to get a look in from characters from all of the rest of the series. And I knew, and I had already started doing tie-ins and novellas and extra bits and stuff for you. But I wanted, in the traditional publishing sphere, to have as tidy a bow on as many of the characters as I could in Reticence. So, and that was a personal objective in Reticence. And fortunately, because we drift quite a bit in that book, but fortunately my editor let me do that. And I was like, look, Reticence is really for you. It's really for the readers, and I want to make sure you're satisfied with it. And luckily for me, Orbit let me do that. By that, they were just like, yeah, just do whatever you want. We're exhausted. So that's how Reticence came to be. And yeah, and to answer your question, it was really bittersweet because I kind of knew I never rule out going back and writing more from a publisher. You know, that's never. I never say never. But I definitely knew that it would be a while no matter what. And so yeah, it's really bittersweet to write, but also I freaking love writing final books and series. They're my favorite. Timeless is my favorite of the Parasol Protectorate books. Manners and Mutiny is my favorite of the Finishing School books. I love the Ambusher Door is my favorite of Delightfully Deadly series, like, I love the final ones because of this. I love to be tidy, because fiction is a big lie, and reality is so untidy, so fiction is my way to make everything tidy and give everybody as many happies as possible. Yeah, so I actually really, really love writing the last books in series. They're my opportunity to have as much fun as possible. There's also like a rule in authordom, which is the people who have stuck with you, you always attrit, with very few exceptions, readers as they go along in a series. So your first book always sells the most, and so on and so forth, unless you're, J.K. Rowling or something. But, so by the time you're on the 5th book or the 4th book in a series, you really are telling those stories for your loyal readers at that juncture. And I always want to reward my loyal readers. That's why there are so many little cookies in my books, little characters that pop back up again, because if you've been paying attention, you'll realize who that character is, and it's just a little yummy nibbly bit for you to enjoy with no caloric.
So with your novellas, you have like chunks of novellas. Are you thinking of Fawn Courtship anytime soon?
Yes, so How to Marry a Werewolf is consistently one of the most popular of those novellas. That's the little umbrella for those books, is Claw and Courtship, for anybody who doesn't know. So yeah, I have some ideas for main characters that would be in that series. And I definitely want to do more of them. I do talk about this relatively frequently, but I have a pretty strong policy on, I don't really write a thing until I've had what I've called the epiphany moment, which is usually 2 characters in dialogue talking with each other. It's really the first scene. So, for example, with Solace, my epiphany moment was Ivy and Alexia walking through Hyde Park together, talking about the fact that Alexia had accidentally killed a vampire the night before and how embarrassing that was. That was the moment I wrote that book. And I actually went back and wrote what would become the first scene later. And I do that quite a bit. But I have these epiphany moments, and that's when I know the book can be written. So as far as the Claw and Courtship ones are concerned, I haven't had an epiphany moment yet for any of those. So that's why they haven't happened. But definitely likely to happen, yeah.
So what was your epiphany for Faith and
Channing? Channing. So actually, weirdly, the epiphany for that series was the appearance of Channing in Poison or Protect. So if you haven't read Poison or Protect, Channing makes an appearance in that book, and it's the first time you realize that he's nice, that he has a nice bit. He's still an asshole, but he is soft, and you're like, so he's soft, but he's soft. In this particular case, he's soft to someone who is completely outside of his bailiwick in terms of, so he's soft to a woman who is gay and lower class. So he's clearly has some sort of baggage.
Romancing the Avenger?
Yeah, Romancing the Avenger.
Oh, it's Romancing the Avenger. Sorry. Yes, you're right. I got my titles confused. It's Romancing the Avenger.
Look at Wiki.
Yeah, exactly. This is why I have a wiki. Or ask the Facebook group. Imogen. He's kind to Imogen, and that was really easy for me to write because I've always known Channing's backstory. So I always known that he has just this sort of terrible history of essentially abuse. And it's turned him into someone who is angry, particularly at women. And how do you unpack that if you're a straight man, right? Or essentially straight. So that was sort of the epiphany that sparked me thinking about, okay, so what does Channing need to bring him back to ground? In romance you always think about what are the voids the 2 characters have that the other character fills? And so, how do I match somebody with Channing and who could take him? Who can stand up to him? And I was like, it's got to be an American. He needs a stroppy, upstart American woman. The Buccaneers is one of my favorite sort of Edith Waldman books. It's a fantastic movie as well, and it is about upstart nouveau riche Americans going in and marrying into the British aristocracy. So that's also a personality type that I was very interested in the 1890s. So I want to sort of capitalize on all of those things. Yeah. The clearest moment within those two characters interacting with each other is the one where he defends her against her mother at the ball, which is exactly. We're like, all right, there it is. That's why we love him. Other. Yes.
So I was wondering, especially like once you started introducing new shifters, because you talked about how you decided how you took vampires from different cultures where they had something akin to our vampire, but how do you decide what the new shifter is gonna be?
The new shifter.
Without just totally having
Too much.
paralysis?
Overwhelming. Oh yeah. Overwhelming decision paralysis. Generally, it's sort of a contrast choice. So, and what I mean is, when I was originally setting up Vampires and Werewolves, and I talked about this at the creature panel, I chose the sort of hive model for the vampires because I wanted a matriarchal counterexample to the sort of patriarchal alpha werewolf that I was going with for the two different camps within the UK. And so again, when I was deciding on what next shifter type I wanted to introduce, which was going to be the lionesses, the werecats, I looked into how lion dynamics work. And I've always liked that they're essentially a matriarchal sort of system. And how could I build that into a new and different alternative culture model for that kind of shifter pack to exist as? And why would they have wanted to stay hidden? And all those sorts of questions. And how would that be a counter, not just to the wolf pack dynamic, but how would that counter the vampire dynamic? And that's just, I like culture conflict, and I like confusion based off of culture conflict because they come out of anthropology. And so building the little cultures for each different shifter has that can inform how the romance is going to work or how the romance is going to conflict is super exciting to me. So that was part of it. I also had Tasharet set up from the very beginning for Primrose. So I wanted her to be a good foil character match for Primrose as well, and a cat-like character seemed like it would be good for Primrose with her desperate need to organize and fit correctly into society, to go up against a cat. What could be more traumatic for her, quite frankly? Because the cat is just going to be like, ooh, boxes. Should I barf on it? Okay, I'll because they're still cats. That's the funny thing about lionesses. If you look up YouTube videos of them or something, they'll try and fit into a box just like any other cat.
You don't like it? Not really.
Other question? Ty, you have another one?
You don't have to ask this, right? You know exactly what I'm gonna ask. So hashtag give Sahih a wife, hashtag Sahih has a wife.
Oh God!
Do you know which novella series she's gonna end up?
Siddig? This is the ultimate question, all right? So Siddig is another character who's a backbone character, so she's through all of the series and a lot of the books. Does in fact have an eventual romance arc, is a complicated, tragic character because loses her first love, who is way too old for her, but we're not gonna talk about that. Taboo subject matter. I'll tackle it. So in all honesty, for a really long time, I left Siddig alone because of all of this tragicness and of where I want to take her romance and all of that sort of a thing. Because I wasn't sure you guys wanted to follow me into very dark territory. And then I wrote Ambush Door, and everyone freaking loves that book. So I was like, fine, I guess you don't mind if I make you cry, so I'm gonna make you cry. So we might get her sooner than later. What of the free novellas does Siddig fit into? Because technically Delightfully Deadly, because those are for the finishing school girls. She at least was one for a while. So could go into that series. Could go into Claw and Courtship, because human love interest. And then could go into Supernatural Society, because hella queer, it turns out. So, I don't know. I haven't decided yet.
She's the nexus point.
She's the nexus point. The answer is whichever one it seems to fit in most organically, cover art-wise and on the website layout.
Where to balance.
Exactly. exactly. Where it will look nicest on the webpage is probably where it will go. But most likely Supernatural Society, I think.
Have you had her epiphany moment yet?
Sorry.
We're waiting.
I know. The problem is I have to go back and reread everything to get Etiquette back in order. I don't like rereading my own stuff. I never listen to my own audiobooks. So like I always feel really grateful when you give me feedback on audiobooks, because if you tell me they're good, that's how I know they're good, because I cannot bear to listen to someone else read my books out loud. That is not because I necessarily dislike them or think somehow their voices are too dissimilar than mine. It is just that I only hear errors. Like I just hear mistakes. And when I reread, the same thing happens. You should see I have the original mass market of Solus, and it still has little post-it notes throughout the whole thing of all of the things I wish I could have fixed, but it was already published.
It's perfect.
We're always our own worst critic.
Exactly. So that's why it's really hard for me to reread. But I will. And then I'll redo it. I think I need a little time first. I think there's a reason my creative zeitgeist is heading towards sci-fi for a little while. I think it's giving my brain space so that when I can come back to the Parasol verse, it's like, oh right, this is pretty good, which does also happen to me.
Now I want to see Lord of the Zom in space.
Oh my god, it'd be fabulous. Other questions? Yes, and then yes.
Can you talk about the things that you made up for the in-universe for your series? Because I'll admit, this is my introduction to steampunk 10-ish years ago, and I admit I thought you made up everything in there, and then I'm like, oh, this is called steampunk. Oh, that's interesting. I might get into that a bit more. So can you talk about the things that you made up for your universe versus the things that you just like took from general steampunk that you did with your research?
Okay, so with the Solus series, which was the first series, it is entirely accidentally steampunk. So I did not actually know steampunk existed when I wrote Solus, so I was engaging in a weird archaeological brain fart moment where I was like, well, what if the Victorians had vampires and werewolves in reality in their world? How would that change politics? And then I was like, how would that change technology? Because my PhD was in technological innovations, archaeological ones, but still, that's where my brain goes. And so I was like, well, the supernatural creatures are going to be confined by certain rules. There's the vampire territory thing, so maybe vampires can't go up in the air. Maybe werewolves get airsick. So like you would develop air tech and dirigible tech and really lean into it if you're a prey species that's trying to get away from your natural predator species, which is mostly on the ground. So, so I was hypothesizing all of the technology that would evolve or not evolve, like wireless. And so I have ethergram, and then how would the Victorian scientists explain the presence of monsters, the presence of the atmosphere that you can float through, all of those sorts of things. So I'm just sort of doing a big brain experiment on how the world would work if Victorian scientists are explaining it and Victorian technicians are attempting to avoid all of these other things that I'm throwing at them. And then I was like, oh, this is steampunk. Look at me go. Because then the aesthetic movement was kind of happening at the same time. And I was like, hey. Then I went to my first couple of steampunk cons, and I was really charmed by the whimsy of steampunk. I remember meeting somebody who had a teapot that came out of a top hat, kind of automated. I was like, this aspect is really fun too. It's really fun to play with the attire without being as rule-bound about exactly what you have to wear, although my characters are pretty strict on fashion. So initially I accidentally wrote steampunk, and then I got involved in it and Solus became popular. So by the time these ones were coming around, I knew A, that it was going to be steampunk, and B, that it was going to be the most steampunk of the series I would write. Specifically because I want to deal with something that has always deeply fascinated me as an archaeologist, which is cultures voluntarily abandoning technology. So this happens throughout history, and it is always an illogical choice from an outsider perspective. The best example I have is the Scots and the potter's wheel, which the Romans introduced them to. And which they utilized for the 200 years of Roman occupation, which the British Isle likes to forget happened. And then entirely abandoned. So they had the potter's wheel, which we know just makes everything easier. And the Scots were like, no thank you. We're gonna go back to this incredibly ugly, incredibly gaudy pottery that we did not make for 200 years, but must have kept as some kind of oral tradition. And we were going to abandon the potter's wheel, and then we're gonna rediscover it in a couple hundred years, when it's our idea. Which is so Scottish. So that's a voluntary technological abandonment. Like, why do you abandon the potter's wheel? It makes everything easier for you. But they did it. They did it because they're Scottish, right? There's no logical explanation for it. So I love this kind of thing. And so I knew the overarching theme of this 4-book series was going to be the Mechanimals. And if you come to the Finishing School series having already read the next books temporally, which is the Parasol Protectorate series, you know the Mechanimals and the Mechanicals suddenly no longer exist. There are no tracks laid down, they just have disappeared. So why? Why did they get abandoned? And so that's the like driving question of these books, like, and how is Sophronia responsible for that? So yes, I put them, so I love the idea of like a floating finishing school. I like locked room mysteries and I like confined, you'll see this in the Delightfully Deadly series in particular. I like confined house parties where you put a bunch of people together, a bunch of quirky characters together, and then like trap them and see what they do. So I really love the idea of the floating dirigible. The finishing school just came super naturally as a concept because I've always been fascinated by the idea of the Swiss finishing school and by these aristocratic families who are sending their young ladies off to Europe to get finished. And I was like, yes, but what if you're being taught to finish other people? Like, so an all-girls training academy for like deadly spies and assassins was like a very exciting concept to me. And then of course you want it to be as secretive as possible, so you stick it up in the air in a place with lots of fog. I put it into Dartmoor because that's my home territory. My grandparents are from Topsham, which is near Exeter, which is on the corner of Dartmouth, so I know exactly everything, what it looks like and how that place behaves, so I set it in a place where I'm very familiar. Yeah, so that's kind of how it came about. As to the elements that are unique or not unique, I'm not very well informed in the steampunk, like I don't really read in the steampunk genre. And partly that is because I'm very scared of being unduly influenced by other authors' voices when I'm writing, and I know for many that's not a big deal, but I'm just scared of it. So I tend to try to read authors I want to be influenced by when I'm writing. So I'll read a lot of Austen and P.G. Wodehouse and authors like that, authors that have a strong comedy backbone that I really like and enjoy, a whimsy, when I'm writing in a steampunk world. But I don't read other steampunk authors because I don't want to be accused of being derivative in any way. So, and because I've written steampunk for over a decade now, it means I'm actually really ill-read in the steampunk genre. If I want to read something just for fun while I'm writing, I'm often reading something just completely different, like hard sci-fi or something like that. Contemporary romance, just something completely different. So that's,
Thank you.
did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Yes.
So, a lot of times you hear about, makers who hate hate something that they make or something. Do you have any character that you wrote
Why
and
did
it
I
was
do
necessary, but you're just kind of like, hate this guy. I'm writing him in here, but I hate him.
No, I really like my controversial characters. Like, I will throw Prussia at you and Channing at you, knowing that eventually I'm gonna make you like them, whether you like it or not. Because that's really fun for me. And because also, I genuinely believe humans are redeemable, and at least most of them have a good quality, and at least most of them have a good reason. If they're acting crabby or terrible, they were hurt badly, and so we gotta figure out why they were hurt and hopefully try to fix it, usually with friends. So, I think that's another message I have in my books. So yeah, I tend to really like all of my characters, which is why the enemies in my books are often natural disasters, obsession, and organizations, So, it's no accident that the, big enemy is scientific obsession in the first book and religious obsession in the third book. And that's because the thing that scares me the most about humanity is obsession. So that I write, the baddies are what I fear in all of my books. So And how do I cope with that, and how do my characters cope with that? So yeah, so I hate to cop out and say I don't really hate any of them, but I don't really hate any of them. And sometimes the unexpected ones, like you revisit, and I'm like, yay, you're back. Yeah, I write my friends into my books, so such a dangerous location. So I write my friends into my books, you know, fictional or otherwise, sometimes accidentally, and so I like them. I like hanging out with them. Yes.
Did any of your experiences as a teacher influence your writing?
Ooh, that's a good question. Well, I'm obsessed with research. And sometimes I can get a little bit distracted by the rabbit hole of research. And I have to be very careful not to spend 3 hours on Wikipedia looking up the history of the syringe. Because I have one sentence, you know. I'm ashamed. I'm getting to the place where I'm like, I'm a dilettante and I like looking up stuff. So like, I'm just gonna let myself do it. I'll get back to the book eventually. But yeah, so obsession with research and in getting things right if I know I don't know the thing. Sometimes I'll get them wrong because I think I know the thing. I mean, most authors do that. And sometimes I get it right but people think it's wrong. This is the suspension of disbelief when you are writing fiction that I learned at the altar of the Renaissance Fair, which is summed up pretty simply, which is at the Renaissance Fair you're not allowed to wear jean. And that's not because they didn't have jean, because guess what? They had blue cotton twill just like jean. But you can't wear it at the Renaissance Fair because everybody sees it as modern. And so that happens a lot when you're writing Victoriana or historical fiction. I can't use the word fuck. Very common parlance in the Victorian era, everybody. Guess what? Everybody swore and they used a lot of similar swear words to the ones we use now. But I just can't do that. I come up with a silly or ridiculous swear word instead, partly because I write comedy, because I write lighter and fluffier stuff. So I don't want to write blue anyway. That's what the Sandra Shifter series is for. But partly because it will just throw the reader out of the book. And even though I know I'm right, and jeans actually existed and people were wearing them, if it's not said in the Old West, nobody believes you. So just don't put it in the book. And there's a lot of stuff like that I have to leave aside or come up with something new or come up with something funny, which is usually what I do instead. Like, oh shoot, I can't put that in the book. Nobody will believe it existed. Gotta do something else. Sometimes I will do it just because I know the percentage of people who are going to notice it and think it's an error is very, very small. An example of that is the oysters being eaten at table. So there's a prevailing supposition that oysters were a low-class food in the Victorian era, but that's not true. They are low-class in some times of the Victorian era, but not in 1876. So there are things that I have paralytically correct because I'm personally obsessed with them, like the fashion and the food. And if somebody calls me out on one of those, I'll defend myself. But most of the time, yeah. There's something I call the 10% rule for all you writers out there, which is if you get one email about a thing you got wrong in one of your books, it means 10% of your readers noticed it. So the smaller your reader base, the safer you are. The bigger your reader base, you're like, 2 emails, 20%. So like you gotta there comes a point where you're like, ooh, if it's indie published, maybe I should correct that thing, or if it's not, maybe I should write an apology letter on my blog. You know? So yeah. 15 minutes. Another question, yes.
What do you think would have happened if Silverania ended up with Felix?
So I'm glad that's my love triangle, everybody. This is classic me writing a love triangle. You're very, very silly if you thought there was ever a chance of that happening, because Felix is clearly the wrong choice, because she was always going to live underground and she needed support for what she's good at, and what she's good at is being hidden. And Felix is the opposite. Felix, however, is one of those characters that I'd love to get a book. I'd love to redeem through a book. But I'd have to figure out what is the right match for him. We'll see. I get it. If she had ended up with Felix, I mean, that is a path I could conceive of, but she would have gone high society manipulative, like politically manipulative, I think. She would have been one of those power behind the thrones, high society dams throwing dinner parties and listening at all of the tables. You know, she would have turned herself into a kind of Lord Akeldama, female version of Lord Akeldama is what I would have imagined. She would have used his society power play position to manipulate the world as best she could. I think she's better suited to being in the shadows, but she probably would have been relatively decent at it. She just wouldn't have liked how much fashion she would have to dress up in and all that sort of thing. And I can't imagine they would have lasted very long. I think she would have found him an extremely frustrating husband. Too difficult to control, among other things. Which of course is one of the fun part of their relationship, is they have a kind of combative relationship. They probably would have been great in the sack, but yeah, not long term. Yes.
So, you've said before that with every book comes a craving.
Yes.
So, with your upcoming books, what should I have prepared?
Food-wise?
Yeah.
Noodles.
Noodles?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Specifically Korean ones if you're into them, but there's a lot of noodles. Noodles and beverage, bubble teas. I have a private theory about the expansion of humanity in the far future, which is that noodles. Noodles in hawker centers. Singapore has got it absolutely correct, and that's what goes into space. Nobody's going to have their own kitchens. It's going to be a lot more like ancient Rome, where food is a communal activity that you gather outside of the home. You don't have flames, fires, or heat. You have ambient temperature maintained when you're in a bubble on a satellite moon. You don't let people cook shit. That's a terrible idea. So instead, you have to figure out how to feed them, and I think hawker centers are the best way to feed everybody. And I think every culture, alien or not, has a noodle of some kind. Noodles are great, and they're very fun to say, and they're delicious. And the noodle.
Fried food and some sort of sharp cutting off that is common all within every
Yeah, no fried food. I hate fried food, so fried food doesn't. Sorry, everybody. I know this puts me on a. I like cheese though, so don't get mad at me. But I don't like fried food. Also, very difficult. Again, fried food because open flame, first form of cooking, high fat content. Makes sense, but going into space where you have confined atmosphere and limited oxygen, no frying, yeah. No flames, no fries, noodles instead. Also, the noodle is a dry noodle or a wet noodle, so you can get liquids into people, always need a delivery system for hydration, etc., etc. And I like noodles, so that's why. But yeah, Fitzgender should have made you want noodles. The upcoming Tinkered Star Song series, more noodles, plus beverages. He's a barista, my main character, so there's a lot of tea, and inventing of tea, and coming up with weird teas made out of alien herbs for other aliens to drink and stuff, because Fex's character is very much like, I need to be the behind the counter, gathering people that way, and the way, he's not a talker, so the way he shows affection to people is in trying to figure out what the perfect beverage is. One of the other characters calls him a beverage psychic at one point. He'll figure out what you like. Yeah.
What does a mermal mostly resemble?
Oh, in my brain, it's really cat monkey, but I think slightly more monkey, but like total behavior cat wise. And there is another mermal coming in the new series. So there's more mermals, but not in the first book, I'm afraid, but there will be a mermal, don't worry. I realized as I was writing this series that one of the messages / things in all of my books is animals. Like I have pets. There's always pets, creature pets of some kind. I think that is a Tamara Pierce problem, but it is also a personal thing. I've always had pets. I love animal companions. There was a little moment of emptiness as I was writing Tinkered Star Song, and I was like, oh, there's no pet. I need a pet. And lo, there's a hilarious mermal incident, and a mermal is acquired, whether they like it or not. Because that's also what happens with mermals, like cats. The best ones just happen to you. Any other questions? We have a little bit more time.
Yeah, how do you make a bladed fan?
Very, very carefully. They do exist, so like you can look up blighted fans. They have existed in history. There are a couple of Asian cultures that have blighted fans. So you can make one. It can happen. It's just like a Swiss Army knife.
And actually, I think it's like a whole martial art, that's one of their, like a thing, isn't it?
I think,
Sort of.
I don't think there's an actual one, but I think it is definitely something a lot of fantasy authors have seized upon and activated. But I am not sure. Yeah, not positive. Other questions? All right, you sure?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Got 10 minutes.
I got how many minutes?
10 minutes.
Okay, well then I'll tell you what I have. I brought my newsletter list if you want to know what's going on with the book that I have alluded to with the barista main character that's has noodles. That's the will be coming out this year. So, but it's my newsletter gets to know what it's about and teasers. Early as well as the cover art first and everything like that is on the newsletter, so that you want to be on that if you want stuff first. I also give things away to my newsletter all the time. And I also brought some bookmarks, which I don't want to take home with me, so you guys have to take these bookmarks away. These are for the Heroine's Journey, which is my nonfiction book. If you're an author, that might be useful for you. And these ones are all of my books with their spine colors. And on the flip side are all of some of my favorite books that I find myself recommending all the time at conventions. So my book's on one side and my favorites on the other. So please take as many of those as you'd like. And I'm happy to sign stuff. I don't have an official signing, so if you would like me to sign books for you, I'll do that. Awesome.
I will say my 9-year-old thinks that the lobby decorations look like giant noodles.
It's giant ramen noodles.
Yes!
No, it's wood.
Hey Gail, do you wanna finish
Okay,
this?
so where did you get that pumpkin?